I have a confession I want to make this morning. I've been a Christian for most of my life. I'm going to turn 30 this year. And there are times I don't want to pray. Am I the only Christian who sometimes doesn't want to pray? Yes, thank you. Or else this would be a little uncomfortable. When I became a Christian, and I'm going to go ahead and assume when you guys did too, I don't know if you had a vision for your life at that moment. I was young. I probably did not. But if I were to think at that time, what will my faith look like in 30 years? I probably would have thought, I bet I'd love to pray a lot more. And if I'm honest, there are a lot of times I just don't really want to pray. And what I'm not saying is I don't love God, or that there are times I don't love God, or that I don't often want to pray. There are just more times than I'd maybe like to admit, although I just did, that I don't like to pray. And I think that is a very human thing. Part of faith is a wrestle. It's a struggle. It's faith does make, there's that cliche that's like faith makes things possible or something. It's like it doesn't make it easy, it makes it possible. And I really do believe that. But there is a struggle that comes with faith, an exercise. And I think you have to find the edge of when I want to pray, and you praise God for those moments, but there's a lot of times I don't want to. When am I least likely to pray? Or maybe most likely to pray? I find I'm very likely to pray when things are terrifyingly uncertain. Has anybody ever known like an atheist who prays? There are some, and they don't pray often, but they might if things are very bad. And maybe praise God for that. Like that there are some times when life is so scary that the only thing I feel like I can do is pray. And that's a good thing, The situation's not good, but it's good that we go to God in those moments. Or I find, if I'm so full of gratitude and peace and just awareness of God's presence, I pray. Like, I love that there's a drive in me from the Holy Spirit that's like, I want to go talk to God. I want to thank Him for whatever He's doing in my life. But what about the times when it's not terrifyingly uncertain, or maybe you're not just filling to the brim with gratitude, you're just dealing with regular issues? There's a leader I really admire. His name's John Acuff, and he has this idea that he calls soundtracks. And a soundtrack is what he calls is a repeated thought or idea that you either consciously or unconsciously repeat to yourself over and over and over again. He calls that a soundtrack. He calls broken soundtracks are thoughts or ideas that you repeat to yourself over and over and over again that are either untrue, unhelpful, or unkind. This man is a Christian, and I've heard him talk about how like this is what Satan does. He gives us these ideas, but our flesh repeats them over and over and over again in our mind. And so I have a broken soundtrack on prayer that maybe you have too, and it goes something like this. God knows I don't need to talk about it with Him. Have you heard that one? Or there's a remix to that soundtrack that goes something like this. It says, God's got bigger concerns than me. I'm blessed in so many other ways, right? Now, what's tricky and dangerous about those soundtracks is one of the checkboxes is it true? Maybe a little bit. Like, I'm probably not the most important issue in the world. There's a little bit of humility in realizing that. But what that does is it's not helpful and it's not kind, because what Satan does with that soundtrack is he gets you to stop praying. He gets you to stop going to God, even with your regular little issues. The issues that maybe you've been praying for a long time. Like, I find that if an issue pops up and I'm on a good day, I'll pray, I'll talk to God about it. But what about like the 7th time, the 10th time, the 40th time? What about the first time it's hard to meet your mortgage? Maybe you pray and you see God come through, but man, barely. What about the 9th month in a row when it was really hard? And are you still feeling like you want to pray? God is clearly meeting the need, but there's something about you that bothers it. Or maybe you have an estranged family member that's like, you prayed for them for a while. There's still something in your soul that's bothered by it. But you've talked to God about it already, right? But I find that the deeper that wedge gets, it can kind of create a gap in our lives. I think this gap is apathy. And it's one of the biggest inhibitors to an authentic prayer life. When the compounding effect of not praying gets so big, it's like there's a whole object in the room that's keeping me from praying to God, and it's apathy. And that really can get in the way. It's like, habits work both directions. They work positively and negatively. And it's like if you stop praying a bit, it can really almost get hard to get back on the horse and do it again. I think one of the biggest inhibitors to an authentic prayer life, though, is shame. Shame when it's been so internalized that it becomes part of your narrative of who you are. When the way you think about yourself is so wrapped up in maybe a choice you've made, choices you've made maybe even a long time ago, or maybe something that's not even your fault, but something that's happened to you that you relate with and you're wrapped up in. It can make it difficult to want to go to God in prayer about those things, because we feel shame. So there's apathy, there's shame, and if you're praying in front of other human beings, I find this one is pretty obvious. Another inhibitor to prayer is a desire to sound strong and spiritual. Have you ever said the right things, but you were hiding from God? There are times when maybe you're asked to pray, or sometimes it follows you into your prayer closet where it's like, I'm going to pray, and you say all the right theological language. If you just observed it on a transcript, it'd look really true, but you know that you're hiding your heart from God. You're not giving it to Him in prayer. And I thought I'd throw one more inhibitor to an authentic prayer life that I doubt anybody in the room struggles with, and it's hurry. I don't know if anybody feels hurried ever. So often, hurry at its worst will just keep us from praying at all. We're too busy. Or what I find is I want to pray. God has done something in my life that has cultivated a desire to talk to Him. But you know what hurry does is it'll come alongside and say, just make it quick. Give the half-baked prayer. And I find that hurry, as we're actually going to talk about later in this message, prayer doesn't have to be long. Hurry doesn't just make prayers shorter, it just makes them rushed. You can have a really short, authentic prayer, or you can have a really long one. But I've had some prayers that I'm saying so many words, I'm rushing through it, but I ironically said a really long prayer. I find that these are 4 huge inhibitors to an authentic prayer life: apathy, shame, a desire to sound spiritual or strong, and hurry. I don't know if any of you struggle with those things. It can be really hard sometimes as a Christian to pray, ironically. What if, though, there were a coach or a guide or a reminder or simply just a structure to hold on to when it's just really hard to know how to pray? And church, in our faith tradition, the Psalms work as devices that God uses to form us into people of prayer. There's good news. There is a structure, and it's called the Book of the Psalms. The Psalms have been prayed by originally Jews and now Christians for thousands of years. Not just as like the next book to read in the Bible, but a book in your Bible, a collection of songs and prayers that are meant to form you and me to become new kinds of people. They make us into people who pray. I find that the Psalms have actually become one of my favorite books in the Bible for that reason. If you've never read the Psalms from beginning to end, like maybe you've just read them in a devotional from time to time, I recommend you do it. Because when you read all 150 Psalms, you will discover that there is no psalm that doesn't articulate a part of the human emotional experience. It hits the whole range. Like there's days when you're just so in awe of God, you almost don't even have like the right words. There's psalms for that. And then there's psalms when, I think it's in Psalm 88, where it says, "Darkness is my only friend." And that's not meant to be like funny. Like that's like, they're such in a bad place that there's no light around them. There's psalms for everything. And I find that it's such a beautiful tool that actually a theologian that I admire, he is a guy named Marty Solomon. He talks about the wisdom literature in Scripture as different tools for the journey of life. That the Proverbs kind of teach us like a meta lesson that we need wisdom in life. But what he says the Psalms do is that in life, just like we need wisdom, we need song. We need music, we need poetry, we need prayers for the journey of life. And not just like an optional tool. Like this is, if you're going to make it through life, a life of faith, you're going to need song. And I find that that's a really beautiful way to look at life. Music is a profoundly human expression. Like we are the only animal, creature, I know we're not just animals, we're made in God's image, but we're the only being that makes music and sees the world musically. Like I was even thinking about how like birds make music, but really they just make sounds, but we interpret it as music. And how could we not? It's beautiful. God made them. God made all the things, and God is the ultimate musician, and we reflect him in that way and make sense of music, and we need music. We need song. And I find that the Psalms, while we don't have the music that it was put to, those prayers, those poems still speak to our being. I love what Tim Mackey says about the book of Psalms. He has this really cool quote where he says, "You enter the Psalms to meet with God and to hear the entire biblical story of God's kingdom sung back to you in poetry." What a beautiful thing, and what an awesome gift that you and I have that is the book of the Psalms. So, if the Psalms are supposed to teach us about prayer, we're going to read our Psalm 123 again and look into it. What does it teach us? But I want to pose a fun kind of question. I like to think about the Psalms as like, if they are music, which they at least at one time were, what genre would this psalm be? And I don't actually have an answer for our psalm this morning, so maybe as a creative exercise you can think and maybe discuss with your neighbor afterward, like, I really think that might be like a Pearl Jam song or something. I don't know. You can really think about whatever, it is. I'm not sure. And I actually find, as we'll get into it in just a minute, that this psalm is not easy to pinpoint on an emotional level. So let's go ahead and reread Psalm 123. You can listen along as I read from the CSB translation. I lift my eyes to you, the one enthroned in heaven. Like a servant's eyes on his master's hand, like a servant girl's eyes on her mistress's hand, so our eyes are on the Lord our God until he shows us favor. Show us favor, Lord. Show us favor. For we've had more than enough contempt. We've had more than enough scorn from the arrogant and contempt from the proud. The word of the Lord. So, this psalm, only 4 verses long. We've been reading a collection this summer, if you've been with us, where we've been reading a psalm every week. And these songs come from a specific collection within the whole book of Psalms called the Songs of Ascent. These are songs that pilgrims would sing on their way to worship in Jerusalem. There were 4 major Jewish festivals that were pilgrimage festivals where you'd go to Jerusalem to worship. And these were the kinds of songs that were at the top of your list to sing on the journey. As you find, there's Psalms 120 through 134. They're all really short. But 123 is the shortest one we've had so far. Only 4 verses. Really simple. And it kind of follows a 2-part structure. It's got verses 1 and 2, which are part A. And the emotional change-up between part A and part B is quite dramatic. It's as if verses 1 or 2 tell of what the poet trusts in and is doing. He lifts his eyes to God. I've been praying this psalm a lot as I've even just been preparing for this message, and I love that first verse. Like, I lift my eyes up to you, Lord, the one enthroned in heaven. Like, if you don't know how to start a prayer, like, do that. Say that. Like, that's a great way to start a prayer. And I've been doing it personally. And it actually reminds me of a psalm a couple weeks ago that we read in church. It was Psalm 121, which goes, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? It comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. So I read this and I'm like, oh, wow, this is going to be another one of those like fun psalms that are like, got a lot of, positive perspective. And it does for a minute. Verse 2 goes right into this image of like trusting God, they use the term servant trusts in their master. But in verses 3 and 4, part B, something changes. It says, show us favor, God, show us favor. And at first that sounds positive, but when you read the couple lines that follow, you wonder what the tone of the message is. You say, we've had more than enough contempt. More than enough. A question that I've been asking is, what heart or mind has to get to the place where the solution or the act of faith to their life story is to write Psalm 123? Like, what position does somebody have to be in? The struggle, the uncertainty, where their act of faith is writing Psalm 123. I find and see this poet wrestling, not sure. They're lamenting is kind of a phrase we use when we talk about the Psalms. But Psalm 123 is unique because it's a partial lament, It's got this part A and it's got part B, both in the same song. It's not like they wrote part A, I don't believe this at least, and then had a change of heart and then started writing part B. I think both were in their mind when they wrote the whole thing. And so the more I read the psalm, I actually struggle to decide if the psalm is a sad, negative lament or if it's maybe a confident declaration through and through. And I actually think it is both. It's A and it's B. The one who prays Psalm 123 doesn't want the utter destruction of their enemies. Again, there are psalms for that. There are some where they're so fed up that they're saying some pretty ungodly things to God about their enemies. This isn't that. This is just a simple deferring to God to send his favor however he would choose to do so. It doesn't feel like a deep lament to me like Psalm 88 that I mentioned earlier, but it is a begging God type moment. Not despairing, just worn out, wanting some help. I think the psalmist is just wondering, where is God at right now? Have you asked that question? The poet of Psalm 123 doesn't doubt if God's there anymore. He's not becoming an atheist. I don't think he's doubting if God's even good. I think he realizes God's good. I think this is a more complicated kind of doubt. I think this person's wondering if God cares that much about their situation anymore. Have you ever felt that way? Because I know that I have. It's a difficult kind of doubting, and for many, when their heart is faced with the slowness of God intervening in their painful situation, this could lead us to a kind of drifting towards apathy that we talked about. But I find that this psalmist, maybe they wrestled with that for a while, but one day they got up and they decided to sing a song. They decided to put pen to paper and pray this prayer. They chose a different path, and it's because of that that we even have this psalm in front of us to pray. And it's not really polished, but it's honest. So, if the psalms are this structure that we can hold on to teach us how to pray when we don't feel like praying, what does Psalm 123 teach us about praying? I think it teaches us to cut the fluff. I had a professor at Indiana Wesleyan when I was a student there. His name was Dr. Bernius, which there were actually two Dr. Berniuses. They were married. So there was Dr. Elaine Bernius and Dr. Brian Bernius. And so I had Dr. Brian Bernius, and he taught Bible courses. And honestly, he really elevated my love for the scriptures. Like, he just taught us to dig and to ask good questions and to find observations and to find the answers to these questions and to write about them. And so he gave us so much content to write about. And ironically, in his class, he had this rule for his papers. He would give you a book, so he'd say, all right, read Jonah. Dig into Jonah. And then he'd ask 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes 5 big questions. And then he would say, write a paper about those 5 questions, your answer, and do it in 2 pages. Now, there was a season when 2 pages felt like a godsend, thank you, only 2 pages, I'm done. Whew. But man, this was the one class I wanted to write 3, maybe 4, maybe even 5 pages on this. I'll do a page for each question. And so, but Dr. Bernius, he wasn't messing around. If you went over 2 pages, he would start to dock your grade. he was the kind of professor where it was really, really hard to fail his class, but it was also really, really hard to get an A+ in his class. So if you were really trying to get that A+, and some of you in here would really want to get that, you'd find a way to get it down to 2 pages. I wasn't that student. I would do 3 pages sometimes. So, and I'd get docked a little bit. But I would ask him, like, oh, Dr. Bernius, why can't I just do 3 pages? And he would kind of laugh and smile at me and just say, Isaac, cut the fluff. Like, just get to the point. Give me the answer in its crystallized, simplified form. And I find that actually really intelligent people are good at doing that. So, Psalm 123, I think, is a permission, or maybe a challenge to some of us, to just keep it simple and get to the point. You address God. And that's important. Start with God. Start with the goodness you know. And then give him your pain. Give him your longing. Give him the thing you've prayed about 20 times already. And say, God, why is this not changing? I've had more than enough of blank. Just give him your longing. Tell him what the struggle is. Because I find that Psalm 123 is really a prayer of trust. And you know, I find that we really demonstrate our trust when we give him our honest longings. Again, some of us want to sound so strong and spiritual sometimes, and there's places for that. There's places for strength and courage. But I find sometimes in the quiet places of prayer, the most faithful, the most trusting thing to do is just to say, God, I do trust you. I need help. I need help with this thing. And right in the center of this prayer is that image of the servants looking to their master. So it makes me think of when I was a wrestler. I, in high school, wrestled, and we had the best coach. His name was Dr. I was just talking about Dr. Bernius. His name was Bob Jarrett. Bob Jarrett, I wrestled at Eastern High School. And he was a Western high school wrestling coach forever. And actually, I think he's in some sort of like wrestling coach hall of fame. I don't know if this was just some urban legend or truth, but either way, it fit. Where he sent some of like the most kids to state championships in wrestling. And that's no joke. I wish I had the number. I don't remember how many it was, but it was dozens of students that he wrestled under him would go to state championships. I was not one of them. I really wish I was. But there were several. And I actually knew one, my friend Evan, did go to a state championship under Bob and won. Bob was an amazing wrestling coach. He was not a flashy guy. He looked like he was in his 60s for like the last 40 years of his life. He just kind of had this like gray hair, a big burly white mustache. He wore sweatpants and Skechers sneakers everywhere he went. To the wrestling match, everything. But he was no nonsense. He would teach you the basics, and you would hit the basics again and again and again. And then once you got the basics, he would run you into the ground again and again and again and again until you were the most athletic people on the campus. He would just run, run, run. So when you got to the match, though, I had so much trust and faith in Bob, Coach Bob. Like, when I shook my opponent's hand and I was scared, if Bob was in my corner, I felt good. I felt like I could win. So I would give it my all, and I'd wrestle, and sometimes I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just doing moves. I was just trying to, move the person around. But when Bob would say a command, if he'd say throw, I'd throw. If he said do the double leg, I'd do the double leg. If he said do a switch, I'd switch. And I was sometimes just in my matches just waiting for Bob to just give a command, because when he gave a command, I knew it was the right command. I didn't always know what the right move was, but he did. And so I'd be waiting. But the more that he started to trust me, he wouldn't give commands as often, which was fine. There were some matches I was clearly okay and felt strong enough to win. But the really, really tough ones, the ones where I wasn't sure if I was going to win, I was down by 2 points in the third period, I didn't know how I was going to get back on top, I'm tired, I would look to Bob. I'd look at him, and he'd be watching me with his arms folded, kind of like he's angry with me, and I'd be waiting. And so I'd be going, and then I'd hear him out of nowhere yell, do the switch. And I'd do the switch, get my 2 points, and be back on top. I find that this is the image I think the psalmist has. They trust God. That's not a doubt. I love the word until in this psalm. It says, like a servant's girl's eyes that are on her mistress's hand, so our eyes are on the Lord our God until he shows us his favor. When you have a trust in God that's until, you've seen him do it. There's a memory here in this psalm. Like, I've seen you do this, God. I'm waiting for your command to give me the thing. I'm looking at you, because when you say go, I'm going to go. When you say do this thing, when you say circumstances change, they'll change. But I'm losing right now, God. I need some help. And I just wonder, how often are we just not honest with God simply because we fear expressing our pain or regret or uncertainty out loud at all, even if it's in front of no other human being, but just to you and God? And I think we have to be like the psalmist and go back to the memory. When was the time that God showed up for you? Because he did. When was it? Even if it feels like he's not there right now, when was he good before? Hold on to that. Because I find, if we're really honest, most of us, I don't think, some maybe, feel like God is disqualifying us, but I feel like we disqualify ourselves. We feel that shame that I mentioned. We feel the apathy. We feel embarrassed. We feel something. Sometimes we just feel numb. We don't feel anything at all, and we wish we did. But I don't think it's God I know God is not disqualifying you, and I want you to hear that if somebody's believing that. God doesn't disqualify you. But I do believe we disqualify ourselves sometimes. We express our trust in God by giving him your longings. One of the best ways to show anyone you trust in them is to ask for their help. So if you're in that place, ask for help. Some of my best prayers were short, honest, and a little bit messy. But I'm so glad that I gave that prayer. I usually didn't want to, but when I just was like, all right, God, I got to give you something, and I just went for it, I find that I feel so much better afterwards because I actually gave something to God. I reconnected with him. So another thing I want to add is that Psalm 123 is not an apology, by the way. I don't know. I don't need a raise of hands, but if you're like me, I used to do this a lot, where I'd overly apologize. Maybe you still feel you do that, like, oh, I'm sorry. And there's times and places to apologize. There are other psalms that will teach you to apologize from time to time. But Psalm 123, I think the word of the Lord from this psalm is not go apologize to God for not showing up for the last few days, few weeks, few months. There are a lot of times and places for that, but this is just a time to lay it out, cut the fluff, and just wait in God's good, loving presence. In my history, when I've needed to call on God for help, there are many times when I felt so ashamed to do so that when I finally did, it was like the first thing I just had to say was like, God, I'm just so sorry I haven't been here in forever. And I don't think that that's a bad way to pray. I'm not saying that this morning, like, hey, if you're apologizing to God, you're doing it wrong. No. If you're apologizing to God and that gets you to God, do it. I'm just saying, I don't think that every time you have to apologize, because sometimes I think that can be a way that we're letting shame control the conversation instead of just saying, God, I trust you. I'm here. Where are you at? Where are you at? Looking to his eyes, waiting for him to give that next cue, because he will. And I want you, church, to hear that God is not uncertain or fearful to hear from you. He's not ashamed of you because of what Christ has done. He just wants to hear from you honestly. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that we learn from Psalm 123. And so, what does that leave us? What do we do? How do we rely on the Psalms for prayer? How can I rely on Psalm 123 for prayer? And for me, I just want to offer one simple solution, and that is memorizing Psalms. I don't know if this is a practice you've ever done in your life, or maybe you did it a long time ago or haven't done it in a while, or maybe you've never memorized any passage of Scripture ever. Wherever you're at, I want to encourage you today, memorize the Psalms. There are a lot of passages in Scripture, a lot of verses, and I don't know if this is controversial or not. I don't believe all verses of the Bible are equally beneficial for memorizing. There are some in Leviticus, a little random. I don't know if that would apply, but the Psalms are definitely memorizing material. They reshape how we think. When you memorize a psalm, it's going to literally build new neural pathways in how you pray. Like, you're going to grab for the words from different psalms as you start to memorize them. I don't know who first taught me to memorize Psalms. I don't know, but I started doing this within the last year or two, where I will take a Psalm, take some time, part by part. I don't do it in one go. I do it like 1 or 2 verses at a time every day, and then I just build on top of it until I feel like I can say the whole thing in one go. I don't start with a really, really long psalm. Start with a psalm like 123. It's got 4 verses. But the more that I do it, the more that I feel like it just has elevated my connection to God. And I don't even mean that in some holy, wow, I'm on a cloud now. I just mean on the hard days when I don't want to pray, because I memorized, it just gave me, when I find the courage, that's the words I grab. I start with, I lift my eyes to you, Lord, and throw it into heaven. And then I'll just go from there and see what happens. And memorizing Psalms becomes an amazing way to give us language when we don't have it. And so when you memorize Psalm 123, because that would be my challenge for you, is I would challenge you this week, start saying Psalm 123 every day. I bet if you do it every day, it will take you 3 seconds. I would do it a few times a day if I'm honest. It will start, you'll realize you've memorized it before you even tried. You'll just say it every day, and then I bet on one day if you give yourself the challenge, okay, now say it, Isaac, without looking, you'll get very, very close. And I find that that's just an awesome feeling, yay, I did it, I memorized the psalm, but then it starts to do its work in you. And I find that as I've been memorizing Psalm 123, it's actually been really unique that A, B, refrain just kind of cyclically repeats over and over. It's as soon as I'm done with the psalm, depending on how I'm feeling, I almost want to jump right back in and really end on those first 2 verses. I don't really feel like I'm in the place where I got to end on B. So I go right back in and say, Lord, I lift my eyes to you, enthroned in heaven, like a servant's hand who's watching his master, like a servant girl's hand who's watching her mistress's hand. I will wait until you show us favor. And I don't even think I said it word for word, but that's not the point. The point, I think, is just to get it in you and let the Spirit do its work in you as you pray the Psalms back to Him. And so I'm curious to see how you pray this psalm. I don't know if I'll ever know, but I'm excited to see what happens as God does it with you. As you pray part A and part B of this psalm over and over, I find that however you land, whether you land on part A or part B, is how you needed to pray that day. If you're really in that place of just struggle, you're probably going to end on part B. And just give that to God unashamedly. Say, God, I need your hand. And I find it's a really beautiful thing that can give us the words to pray when we don't feel like praying. We've mentioned for the last several weeks that the Psalms are the Psalms that we've been reading are songs of ascent. And like I mentioned earlier, what that means is that pilgrims would travel to Jerusalem. And so I actually asked Louisa this week, I was like, what do you think that means? I'm trying to make sense of that. Have you read anything? I trust her a lot in her wisdom. And she was like, well, I know that there's the 4 major holidays that they would travel to. And she reminded me of a passage in the Gospels that I think a lot of you know, where Jesus was a little kid. It's the only passage we have of Jesus being a kid where he gets lost in the temple. Do you remember that story? If you don't, the short version of it is, Mary and Joseph and Jesus go down with their families to Jerusalem. I think it was for Passover. And they celebrate. It's great. And then Mary and Joseph start going home. Jesus got left at the temple. And so they're 2 or 3 days journey away or something crazy when they finally realize, crap, we left Jesus at the temple. And so they have to go back, and then I think Jesus gets in trouble. It's the only time he got in trouble in his whole life because he's God. But they come back, but I think what's striking, or maybe the context that's kind of in that passage, is how is that possible? How would they have lost Jesus? And I've heard that people have said that, yes, maybe not the greatest parenting moment, but I do find that you travel with a group. You're not just in your nuclear little American family. You're traveling probably with your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, probably your neighbors and their family too. As a community, you traveled. And so they probably thought Jesus was with, Aunt Susie or something. I don't know what a Hebrew name would be. And they left. So as I think of these songs of ascent in Psalm 123, I want to kind of paint a picture of, imagine you're an Israelite in an Israelite family, and you're traveling to Jerusalem for one of the festivals, and it's been a particularly hard year. You're eager to get to worship because you really need to rekindle this. You need some of God's favor. And so you're traveling, and every night you make camp, you set up the tents, you have a table, and everybody in the family's gathering around the table. And you're asked, hey, what psalm do you want to pray today? And maybe you give Psalm 123, and around the table, everybody joins you in that psalm, praying that prayer to God before you break bread together on your way to go worship God. And I find this morning we have a beautiful opportunity to participate in communion.